Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Inevitable. This is MotorTrend's podcast, our vodcast about the future of mobility, the future of transportation, the future of cars. We're back in our original studios.
Check out the fancy digs. We should see the zebra print over here.
It's kind of exciting.
The windows. Windows.
But today we're talking about, is there a future for a particular form of zero-emission transportation, the hydrogen fuel cell passenger car?
We're talking to a gentleman by the name of Brian Goldstein. He's the executive director for a company called Energy Independence Now.
And I think it's more of an organization than a company.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or it's .org. You're right.
Yeah,
so einow.org and also driveh2.org. We'll get into his intro in just a second, but I do have a question that we got from a great, ardent, passionate listener by the name of Tim Bridgeham. He sent this yesterday. And he says, hey, I have a question for you both. My wife and I are looking to get our first EV in 2026, so next year.
Okay.
With your knowledge of the EV market and likely what's coming, I'd love your input on the top 3 EVs you'd recommend based on the following must-haves and nice-to-haves. A bit more context, we own a home and live in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains outside of Seattle, where it's quite rainy. We enjoy biking and skiing, so we need a hitch rack and a roof rack capabilities and all-wheel drive. So, the musts. Under $50,000, and it would be nice if it wasn't this wasn't at the base price. 325 miles of range, but closer to 400 would be ideal. Tesla, NACS charger compatible, all-wheel drive, quiet, the racks, as mentioned, hitch and roof. And then design aesthetics, we like Polestar, Volvo, and Rivian. Those are the musts. The nice to have, large sunroof, heated seats, high-quality sound system, user-friendly with iPhones, which is an interesting one. And then just some additional information. We're not too keen on Tesla. They feel a little too ubiquitous. And then there's the Elon Musk factor. Though I'm not 100% opposed to getting one. That means we've got to convince his wife. And then lastly...
Old Mary guy, insider baseball.
last. Thinking about doing this in 2026, would you buy a new one, lease a new one, or buy a used one? Thank you so much.
All right.
So you go, I got thoughts.
Right off the bat, the under 50,000 and over 300 miles of range is problematic, especially if you're not looking,
and all-wheel drive.
And all-wheel drive if you're not looking at a Model Y. And then the nice to have is the plays well with iPhone integration, because I was going to say, Chevy Blazer, slightly used Chevy Blazer EV with all-wheel drive. Man, if you're living in rainy conditions and you're going up to the mountains and stuff like that, what a great EV. However, famously, doesn't have CarPlay or Android Auto. I would say, slightly used Model Y really hits it. A well-used Rivian, and sadly it's going to be real well-used. I don't know. Will they be under? Like right now, I looked it up. They're all kind of like between 67 and the cheapest Rivian I saw was like 52,000. And while it doesn't have CarPlay, it does play very nice with your phone. But I guess you're just for that range, it's tough. Ed, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so I got some good ones, and I kind of went the same way. And I'm just checking one that it just a thought I just had. Okay. So I'll just go back to front here. First of all, because you're thinking 2026, so you have all 2025 to consider. That's some time, so they'll use that to your advantage. I'm a buy used guy, and my option.
He works in the new car industry.
Dirty secret. I just tell you buy a used car.
I like new cars.
I would say off the bat, I think Johnny's correct. It's probably a Tesla is the most bang for your buck. I mean, you can get Model 3s long ranges for $20,000.
So you can just get two,
You can get two, his and hers, then you have a combined range, right? Or Model Y, you can get those for $30,000. And those are a little higher mileage. So, but definitely under 50, you can get a really nice all-wheel drive long range Model Y or Model 3, and it'll tick almost all the boxes except the plays nice with iPhone.
It pairs. It just doesn't have Apple CarPlay.
Yeah, if you like CarPlay, if you like all the stuff on your iPhone, it's not that handy. Now, if you want to look at some interesting other options, I was looking at some used Cadillac Lyrics.
Oh yeah,
which are quite nice.
And have CarPlay.
And have CarPlay. Now, the problem is $50K, at least currently, you're going to be talking a rear drive, not an all-wheel drive. So it's a slight deal breaker there.
No, that's a must-have. That's a deal breaker.
It's a deal breaker because, yes, they want all-wheel drive, right?
Yeah.
So,
I could say you could get a used Lyric on snow tires and you'd be all right.
right.
So,
And,
but
you know,
no,
I think
no Americans hate snow tires. So.
Ionics, you could get an Ionic, but I don't think I don't think you hit the 325 realistic range.
Never, not even close to 320. The 325 for under 50 is a very hard thing. I mean, the only thing that actually does it is the Teslas, or like a very Rivian. If you put it on, that's an interesting one. Gen 1 Rivians on the street tires are like 328 range. If you're really going skiing, though, you're going to want it on the off-road tires, and Gen 1 is 285, I believe, is the mileage on the off-road tires. Right. Gen 2 is better, but Gen 2 just came out, and they're not going to be that cheap. Maybe they will. Who knows? EVs don't really hold their value all that well.
Right.
And then you said, with our knowledge of what's coming out, Ed and I are fathers of young children. We don't sleep. We don't know anything.
Right. But look, I will tell you the one that my last one is, I drive a Ford F-150 Lightning. I love it. It drives really nice. I will tell you, getting one under 50 is going to be really tough.
What's the range?
But that's a little bit of a problem. It's 330 with the large battery, but it's really closer to 280 to 300, so it's not that close. But I'll tell you, here's the secret: Silverado work truck. So
nice.
Yes,
nice.
Hertz bought a whole bunch of these and then dumped them recently. And I was just checking; they are like hovering at 60 plus or minus $5,000 right now. So in a year, could go under 50. They have, if you get the big battery, they are over 400 miles of range, I think. 450.
Easily.
It's a giant battery.
Yeah.
And the crazy part is, GM said no CarPlay, except for like a couple of these legacy vehicles. One is Lyric, and then the work truck version of the Silverado.
Right, just the work truck. Yeah,
allows you to have CarPlay, and if you want to put bikes in the back. I mean, you can put them on the roof, you can put them on the back, you can put them in the bed.
And I would say, it's not talked about enough, but like the Lightning, for instance, EVs have such a crazy advantage off road. It's just that super torque at no RPM. Like we did a video a while ago. We did a Hummer EV versus a Lightning, and I was ready for the Ford. For the Hummer to wipe the floor with the Lightning. I thought it was actually a stupid comparison. And then, even in like slick mud on street tires, the damn Lightning was good. It was like really good off road.
Yeah.
So that's the Chevy EV is the base model.
Silverado work truck.
Yeah.
Check it out. See how the prices go. And the last thing I'll say is buy in December, and look if you want to lease Hacker leasehackr.com. I've seen a lot of crazy deals in there. I don't know anyone who's used it. Actually, no, one guy's used it for an Ionic. Got an amazing deal. Check it out.
In December, super good advice, but really just before Thanksgiving, that's really the salespeople got to push volume out.
Yeah.
So you can find some crazy deals.
Anyways, thank you, Tim. Hope it works out. Please let us know what you end up with.
And if you have a question and you want like a cool one of these,
I don't know. We don't have many of those left.
Well, we'll get some more.
Maybe an old
right?
T-shirt,
right?
Yeah.
Or a hat or something.
Like that,
Ed will send you a gift.
Yes.
Contact us.
MotorTrend at motortrend.com.
Yeah. Or Instagram or whatever you want.
All right. That was a long intro. Back to our man, Brian Goldstein, Executive Director at EIN, which is not Employee Identification Number for your tax return. It is actually Energy Independence Now. It's an organization devoted to advancing fuel cell EVs and renewable hydrogen infrastructure for transportation, renewable energy storage, and deep decarbonization. We're going to bring him on. We're going to talk to him. He's a good-looking guy. He's not the kind of guy you'd think to be pushing hydrogen so hard. So I was immediately suspicious. But it turns out he's actually very knowledgeable and quite pleasant. Okay. So Brian Goldstein.
Welcome.
The Six Marai man. As
I thought we might get to that.
Jonny describes.
Well,
also,
you're here only because
Mr.
Farah
Hydrogen.
called me or I saw him or something. He's like, dude. He's like talking about how his neighborhood has like cool cars. He moved into a new house a while ago. He's like, there's some dude who has like 6 Toyota Mirais. What the? I'm like, what? I got to meet this guy.
So that's you. What do you do? What do you do?
Yeah, end of discussion.
That's it.
Yeah,
All right,
I'm that
Yeah.
guy.
So why Mirais? What do you do? What's the fascination with hydrogen? The
All
whole thing.
right. Well, that runs deep, but I think that's why we're here. So I run an environmental nonprofit named Energy Independence Now, which is a really wonky name that doesn't quite nail down what we do, but we got it in the 90s when that kind of meant a little something different. Our public-facing education initiatives are all under Drive H2 or driveh2.org, which is a little more specific about what we do. But we're a hydrogen advocacy group. I've been in this business for about 20 years. I have been running this organization for, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years. And all those lines start to get a little blurry.
Sure. Yeah.
Ultimately, EIN is what we go by. EIN cut its teeth early on in the hydrogen industry and space, specifically here in California. So we wrote the California Hydrogen Highway blueprint for Governor Schwarzenegger.
That's right. Schwarzenegger. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we essentially we were founded a little bit before the Schwarzenegger administration by a guy named Terry Tamnen, environmental rock star. He went on to become the Cal EPA secretary for Arnold and had already created this nonprofit. We were kind of born out of another nonprofit environment now that some people might be familiar with. It was in Santa Monica, and Terry ran that. So did Mary Nichols at one point, which is pretty cool history there, honestly, when you go back into this movement, and specifically this movement in California. So Terry went on to become Arnold's EPA secretary, and Arnold said, hey, we're going to do hydrogen. That in and of itself is a pretty cool story. I don't know how deep you guys want to run on
Let's
this.
hear. Starting with Arnold Schwarzenegger is a good way.
Yeah, it is a good way. So, right, Arnold decides to run. Terry's, running this environment now, this environmental nonprofit that had deep ties in this part of LA. And one of their board members approached him and said, hey, I think Arnold's going to run, and he needs some help developing out his environmental platform. And Terry's like, well, there's no way this guy's going to win. But what we're going to do here is we're going to give him the most aggressive environmental platform in the history of California.
And it was.
It really was.
Yeah,
Which
right?
means the most aggressive in the country.
in U.S. history.
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the line of thinking there was like, well, when this guy loses, we can go shame the Democratic candidate into having to step it up a little bit here.
Politics.
Right? Yeah,
Nice,
right.
nice.
So he's like, we're gonna, if I'm gonna do it, we're really gonna do it. And Arnold was all about it,
And I remember when he was running, he was a quote unquote Republican, but I remember I was having conversations with my then fiance, like, yeah, okay, like the sexual harassment stuff is insane, but like, look at this, like that's interesting that this guy, and I know he's always been something of an environment, despite his association with the Hummer.
Yeah, sure,
he
right.
was, he converted that to hydrogen, right?
I know, yeah. I copied that and built a hydrogen Hummer essentially right after. It wasn't a OEM. I think GM might have done that one for him, but
Okay.
we can get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
So anyway, Arnold goes on, wins the race. Terry calls him up the next day. Mr. Governor-elect, congratulations. You're the new governor, and now you're responsible for implementing the most aggressive environmental policy in the history of the country. And as the story goes, Arnold said, no, Terry, you're wrong about that. I don't have to do it. You do. And so he brought in Terry to run the show and ended up being Cal EPA secretary and cabinet secretary. And then Terry recruited EIN to essentially literally build out this model for the California Hydrogen Highway Initiative after a lot of years of research into why hydrogen before
Could you
that.
talk about what the well, first of all, I just want to say I voted for Larry Flint. Second of all, can you talk about what the California Hydrogen Highway was?
Yeah, sure.
Just get everyone up to speed.
In a nutshell, it was, and this is kind of where EIN cut its teeth in between industry and government. It was bringing those two entities together and breaking this chicken or the egg, which is like, pretty much you say chicken or the egg, and anybody in the hydrogen business just rolls their eyes like, we're back to the chicken and the egg, But it really is. It's like, are we getting the stations first or are we getting the cars first, right?
Yeah.
So we got the government to commit to building, at first, the first 100 hydrogen stations, and then Jerry Brown doubled that to 200 hydrogen stations. And then we got several OEMs to commit to bringing certain volumes of fuel cell electric vehicles.
And which OEMs?
So Honda and Toyota at the time. Hyundai came in a little later.
Mercedes, too.
There was Mercedes. Ford was in there. BMW was in there, but they didn't really. I don't think they brought volume. They brought some some cars to the market. They were kind of testing some stuff. A lot of those companies, look, the automotive industry is ultimately pretty conservative about how quickly they will bring something to market. I've got to applaud the companies that actually brought the vehicles literally to market, where a consumer could walk into a dealership and drive one.
Right,
off
and
the
the
lot.
first, if I remember, let's see, FC Clarity, the Honda FC Clarity was like 2007,
Oh,
8.
they had
Yeah.
RAV4s running on hydrogen.
Yeah, there were some.
Which
None of
which
those
was-
were publicly available, but yeah, they had
Okay.
them. And
But the first
they were press
consumer-
cars.
Honda had the FCV. That was a test.
But wasn't the FC Clarity the first
FCX
consumer?
Clarity,
FCX Clarity. That was the first, like 2007, 8.
Yeah, that was the second Clarity.
Okay.
The first one is in the Peterson still. The second one's probably in the Peterson as well. So they did strategically place some of those cars, but I don't think Joe Schmo walking in off the street could just walk into a
I
dealership.
think if I remember, because I told my friends, because it would have been a perfect car for a friend of mine, a childless couple, all the constraints. I think he had to like apply to Honda. Like,
Exactly,
hey, Honda,
yeah.
we'd be a really good match. Because I drove it, I'm like, this thing's great.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was pretty.
Yeah.
It was. Somebody will probably yell at me about this. I think it was the first one designed from the ground up to be a fuel cell electric vehicle.
100% because it had a long wheelbase, because they didn't want to give up trunk space or backseat passenger space, and for the tanks, which were between the backseat and the trunk. And and also I remember one of the Honda engineers had a little bit too much to drink, and he's like, this is a $40 million car.
I believe it. Yeah.
He's like, this is
Jamie Lee Curtis was one of the first.
Yeah,
people
she
to-
was.
to-
Good memory.
to-
Really
to
good
get
memory.
one. I like Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
Speaking of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah. And then was it, my question with that was it always just for consumer cars, or was the hydrogen highway pointed at like trucking and stuff like shipping, stuff like that?
Yeah. So initially it was light duty, right? That's a deep conversation.
That's what we're here for.
Even light duty consumer vehicles, they wanted to stay away from fleet vehicles. They didn't want to pigeonhole the cars to look like a Crown Vic, so that people thought it should only be a cop car or taxi or whatever. So they thought we really want to bring this out initially as a consumer vehicle. And essentially, those companies, Toyota and Honda, I should say that they were developing that technology for decades before that point. And so I've got to give them credit. They have been committed to this tech for a very long time. But there were a lot of conversations in those early days, like, hey, man, let's just go for fleets, like a fleet of 100 cars or however many cars that only, comes back to one place every single night and can refuel in one place. We don't have to worry about this whole network all over the
And what
stations.
was the argument against that? Because that seems to me, if you want to get volume fast, fleet.
Yeah, no, they just didn't want to pigeonhole it. I think at the
Who's
time,
they is
the automotive companies, and so I can say, who my points of contact that my colleagues were at the time. I can't say it was necessarily their decision, but I do know that we always came back to this Crown Vic conversation, where if you saw a Crown Vic on the street that wasn't a taxi or a cop car, you're like, why,
right. So
why
weirdo
would
driving
somebody drive a
or it's a Forest Service vehicle. Yeah.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
So, my understanding and foggy memory of 20, 25 years ago was that was kind of the reasoning there.
Okay.
And so so people can sort of place this. The actual hydrogen highway is where?
Well, so it's California. It's essentially the California Hydrogen Highway is a network of hydrogen stations, which then will enable people to buy cars or lease cars or whatever, and be able to utilize those stations.
Right.
And how many got built? You said Governor Brown increased it to 200.
Yeah. So this is where we're going to go go deep. Honestly, I told you guys, obviously for everyone in LA, it's been a wild ride the last couple of weeks. I'm kind of exhausted, and I figured let's just do the unplugged version. I'm going to be just straight up with you guys about
real
where
quick.
we are with
We
that.
should say it's January 17th, so it's a week after the most destructive wildfires in California history has kind of like upended our lives. So thank you first of all,
Absolutely.
Brian, for making the time.
Oh yeah, of course.
But yeah, things are crazy right now. So
Yeah, things are pretty
excuse
crazy
all
right
three
now.
of us if we haven't slept and blah blah blah.
Yeah, I think. Well, I was thinking about that a lot coming in because, a lot of my job is communications, education, outreach. I do a lot of government work, unfortunately, and so everybody's very sensitive about like the phrases and the terminology, and I think honestly at the hydrogen in the hydrogen space. we've got to move beyond that. Somebody just needs to be kind of honest about where we are. So, to be perfectly blunt with you about where we are with stations, it's bad. It's
pathetic.
abysmal, right?
Yes.
So, and we can go into why.
Yeah, I mean,
But,
a
but
lot,
let's frame it up, because again, I go back to the concept is the hydrogen highway, and my understanding is, if you live in Southern California, it's like Torrance. It's like you got a few out there. This is when Toyota and Honda. Toyota has since moved, and they drove bulldozers through the building. It's I think it's gonna be an Amazon warehouse or something like that. But for a while, for like 10, 15 years or so, they were pretty reliable. I think they were Shell stations along 190th or that area.
Still is. Well, it's
Yeah.
not Shell, but yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
It was
You're
Shell,
right?
right?
You're correct,
and, and that to me is when you say the California Hydrogen Highway, it's like, okay, great. If you live in the greater Los Angeles area,
there's 3 stations.
there's like a non-zero chance you can refill your hydrogen car.
There are more than that, actually, but
Okay.
I'll get into it, right? Let's just do it right now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think our peak was 54 stations, right? And
I mean,
there's
that's
some-
not horrid.
It's pretty horrid after 10 years
Right,
and what
right,
was supposed to be, ultimately, in retrospect, a pretty small amount of money. It was $200 million it was supposed to go to build these stations, right? And you put that in perspective with the amount of money going into public charging and, into every other.
High-speed rail.
Oh, gosh, yeah. We should do a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
So 54 stations peaked maybe, I don't know, a year and a half ago. I counted yesterday. We're at 42 stations. We're going in the wrong direction
Oh, so
here.
why the? I mean, because
Nobody's buying them.
well, okay,
No, it's not that at all. But
yeah, I was gonna say.
We had one. We had a Mirai.
No, but
Ask
I
Aaron,
just-
talk to Aaron Gold about charging it during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah.
I went with it. It was insane.
No, I know, but hang on. What
All
I
right,
was
let's
going
get
to say
there.
was
Let's talk about it.
like Hyundai with what was it the Nexo? Like I know a strange amount of people, and they told me they're like, oh, I got a Nexo. It's like $99 a month or free or whatever. I'm like, where are you gonna fill it up? And they're like, I'll deal with that. But like more than one, you know what I mean? Like people, they know I'm in the car biz. Like, what do you think? And I'm like, I think you're crazy. Like, how are you gonna put hydrogen in it?
So look, I've been driving only fuel cell electric vehicles for 10 years in LA. Up until the last year or two, never had any problems fueling. There's a station here on 3rd and Fairfax right around the corner. There was one Playa Vista. There's Torrance. To kind of frame this, those were the first publicly accessible stations, and that was a Herculean feat to build these. And I'll explain that in just a minute. Before that, there was a small network of behind the fence stations. It was
Right.
called the 5 city stations, right?
And I remember that's when, like, I think when the Clarity came out.
Exactly.
We quizzed them on that. And they're like, well, for industry and hospitals, they use hydrogen for different things. And so there's places where they fill up their tanks and you can fill your car up.
Kind of, yeah,
Yeah,
kind
something
of.
like that,
So yeah, they were behind the fence, like one at the Santa Monica City Yard where the refuse trucks and the police cars and stuff go. One in Burbank. There were, and so. This was a pilot program. I don't know if it's CARB or AQMD. Somebody retrofit like 30 Priuses to have fuel cells, and they ran those as a pilot program to see what it takes to fuel them, how reliable they are, all this stuff. Collected a bunch of data. So now the Hydrogen Highway, these are publicly accessible stations and are designed to be publicly accessible stations. The fact of the matter is there was not a single hydrogen station in the world where a consumer could drive up to a pump, a dispenser, and swipe a credit card and buy a gaseous fuel by the kilogram, much less in the United States of America. I mean, it's just like anti-American to have to even say the word kilogram. Like, what the hell are we talking about here, But, in order to be able to do that, those things have to pass weights and measures. Like when you go to the grocery store and you're, weighing your produce or whatever, and it's like there's a little seal on there. Somebody from the government comes in and makes sure that if you're buying a pound of whatever, it's actually a pound,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We had no way of doing that for hydrogen before. So in order to be able to create these dispensers and for consumers to be able to use them, we had to create a system of measuring and making sure you're getting the exact amount of hydrogen out of this dispenser.
What a crazy problem. Excuse me.
Oh, my gosh.
What a crazy problem to have. Yeah.
It took us years to sort out the POS system to be able to swipe a credit card at one of those machines.
That seems to be the hardest thing. Like somehow I can use my credit card on my phone to buy everything, but charging a car or getting hydrogen,
It's
credit
crazy,
cards
right?
don't work.
It's
It makes
crazy.
no sense. But okay.
And then there were nozzles. There were hydrogen nozzles that were like handmade in some small Austrian facility. It took like 6 months to make one. They did like 20 a year. They cost like $30,000 or $40,000.
Right, and somebody drops it on the ground.
That was it,
Yeah.
right? So they worked if you were in a lab coat and very careful and both hands, like this is the hydrogen dispenser, it worked every time. But when you let thousands of people who are on their phone and don't really care about it, dropping the dispensers, you drop one of those, the station's down for 6 months while you're waiting for another one. So,
I mean, my first experience second experience with it, my first was at FC Clarity, which we never saw them refuel. We all noticed on the drive. But my second was Mercedes. They had the B-Class F-Cell or F-Cell B-Class or something. And I went on the first leg where it was driving around the world. And I drove from Stuttgart to Paris. And me and Michael Harley, who just fled to Idaho. But anyways, fellow journalist, we very famously, along with the Chinese team, ran out of hydrogen before because we were on the Autobahn.
We're sure, why not?
and they were like, how's this? I almost had an engineer deck me, and it was
because they can't charge it.
Well, you try to explain to a French cop that you're out of hydrogen. Like that conversation went very badly. But I watched these guys fill this thing up, and I mean, it was like 8 German engineers, and it was they had to like somehow with a mobile thing pressure it up to 10,000 psi.
Yeah, sure.
It was gnarly, and I was like, this is not a consumer technology.
This is what 05, 06, 07.
No, this would have been 2011 or 12.
Oh wow,
yeah,
okay,
something like that.
Okay, that's some years into it.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it was Schumacher and Nico Rosberg were driving.
That's
F1.
pretty cool.
It was the 125th anniversary party of Mercedes-Benz. So it was maybe 2025. So it was 2010. 2010.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was 1885.
Cool.
No, it was 11 because it was 1886 was the patent wagon.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, long story short, that technology has come a long way with the dispensers, and there's more competition in the market. It's become more resilient. We've learned from countless, I wouldn't say mistakes. I mean, it's just trial and error in the beginning of taking basically a lab technology and introducing it to consumers that, just I think by nature and aren't very respectful of the equipment we're using at a gas station because we haven't had to be in the past.
Why would you be? Yeah.
But so where are we now?
Okay, so the dispensers, the infrastructure at these stations, it has evolved considerably. It's relatively, I'd say it's very reliable, the actual tech, right? We've moved on from gaseous storage to liquid storage, which, would kind of move a station from 200 kilograms. The initial station's like 180 kilograms. Now they're commonly 800 to 1,000 kilograms of hydrogen, which means you can push a lot of cars through there. A 5-minute fueling time.
Real quick, because like what goes into a tank? It's like 5 kilograms is like a full tank.
Yeah, and so most people don't let it run to empty. So the average fill is probably around 3 kilograms.
So you can do a lot with 800 to 1,000 kilograms.
Oh, you can do a ton with it. It takes about 5 minutes to refuel. So, if you think about it, even giving it a conservative estimate of, 10 minutes between the time that fuel's actually going into another person's car, you can get a lot of cars refueled in a day at one dispenser compared to, one charger, let's say.
Sure.
And then now the newer stations have maybe 4 fueling positions. So you can fuel hundreds of fuel cell electric vehicles a day. And we will and we should get into why that's important, especially in a very population dense environment like LA or Tokyo or something like that. But
what was with the contraction from 54 stations to 42?
Okay, let's
because I think there's more hydrogen fuel cell passenger cars now than there were.
So there are. So, some of it is legacy technology. We had, the initial stations opened in 2015. I don't know what a, level 2 charger looked like in 2015, if it would still be relatively reliable now.
Level 3,
level 3, right?
Yeah,
some of the stuff just ages out.
Yep.
There are a few things that went into it. The biggest problem right now is fuel supply. Hydrogen production technologies, that's an old technology, and fuel cell technology is an old technology, right? So we've been producing hydrogen, meaning society, at an industrial level for well over 100 years. Those systems are locked and loaded. They know how to do it effectively. Refineries rely on it every day. Fertilizer is, hydrogen's a huge component of fertilizer. Like the things that make the world go round use hydrogen, and we've been doing that effectively with fossil fuels, which is I
was going to say, what color hydrogen?
Right. With fossil fuels for well over 100 years. So it's not a problem actually making hydrogen, but making, decarbonized, renewable, zero carbon hydrogen. We could talk about the color rainbow if you guys want to get into that in a little bit.
I would love to.
Okay, so that's like a
But in a little bit.
yeah, relatively speaking, a little newer technology, but. As much as there are hydrogen production facilities all around us in California, but they're not set up with the merchant capability to refuel a trailer or a truck that can then take hydrogen to a station and then refuel that station, right? The stuff's just going into massive
infrastructure, real infrastructure.
It is, right? So you've got in the complete vertical, you've got hydrogen production. And then hydrogen distribution, which is a very different thing, getting it from the production facility to the station itself. And then you have the stations. And
so like if a refinery, an oil refinery, that uses a lot of hydrogen, how is that transported from the production facility?
a lot of it's produced at the refinery. So a lot of the refineries have, and
okay, that makes sense.
yeah, and they typically, even though they have production on site at the refineries, can't produce enough. They use a lot of hydrogen. It scrubs the impurities out of oil, and as you refine gasoline into a more and more pure product, it takes more hydrogen to do that. So a lot of them are on a pipeline right now, just to simplify it.
So it's a pipeline from the production facility to the refinery.
Right.
So Johnny asked 54 to 42, and you said distribution infrastructure. But can we talk about the giant, enormous hydrogen-shaped elephant in the room, which is all these problems would be solved if there was actual demand for hydrogen cars. Is that accurate? No one's that interested in hydrogen cars.
It's not. Frankly, we're having to dial back allocations of fuel cell electric vehicles in California. More people want to buy them than we can now let buy them because the stations, and I say the stations aren't reliable enough. It's not the station itself. There are a lot of things that go into that, but the customers can't rely on being able to fuel those vehicles. The vehicles are great. There's demand for the vehicles. And look, when I say demand, we're talking production volumes of maybe 3,000 units a year per OEM. We're not talking 50 or 100,000 units. But of those 3,000 units, people want to buy them. They're also, as our battery electric vehicles, heavily subsidized in different ways. So there are incentives that make people want to buy them. But frankly, I've got to say, I drive a Mirai. It's a great car. I love the car.
Looks
right.
Great.
So I don't really feel like I'm compromising on the vehicle experience. It's really the fueling experience. But let's dive into that question, right? Why are we going backwards in the number of stations? Essentially the organization I run, worked with a lot of other people to create legislation that allocated by law taxpayer money to build hydrogen stations, and the same bills. Initially actually went to 5 different alternative fuel categories. So hydrogen, battery electric vehicles. There's probably natural gas at the time. This goes way back, right?
Yep.
Maybe propane. I'm forgetting.
Remember there was all
biofuels,
kinds of police adjacent vehicles that ran around on propane.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there were 5 categories of alternative fuels that each got a $200 million allocation over a 10-year time period.
Biofuels, wow.
Right. By the state government, and so that was to be distributed by the California Energy Commission. And to be quite candid, of that 10-year time period, the Energy Commission took a 4.5-year hiatus in even distributing that money towards hydrogen stations. So ultimately, shocker here. The government didn't really uphold the commitment that they made while the auto OEMs were, and it left the customers in the lurch, and it's really tarnished kind of this whole concept of whether fuel cell electric vehicles are a viable part of a zero carbon.
What was the reason for the pause? Because I'm trying to think, going from the Brown to Newsom. It's not a huge, even Schwarzenegger, Brown, Newsom. It's not a huge change in priorities in terms of the environment, right?
Yeah, not at all. Not at all from from the top, from leadership. But again, this is where kind of I just want to be blunt with you guys and say the stuff that people aren't really talking about. There are a couple of people at the Energy Commission that just didn't like hydrogen, just didn't feel like they wanted to support that technology.
Big oil patrons.
Yeah,
but also look. I mean, you can make a lot of arguments that these fueling problems can be solved, but with an EV because you just plug it in when you're at your house.
That's a simple way of looking at it. But that's kind of so.
Do you drive anything else? You mentioned that you said something about the cars you drive, and up until recently, it sounds like are you now driving in an EV, or are you still
Yeah, fuel cell electric vehicles?
You're still
10 years.
you're full cell all the way.
Solid 10 years.
How many do you have at the moment?
Two.
Oh,
actually,
only
yeah.
two.
Yeah, two.
But I still struggle with the volume. So all of your career is now doing this 20 years, and at least 15. What are we talking? So 10 of it, a solid 10 of that, has been during the rise of Tesla, primarily in California, and the EV starting to really take over. And if you're in the hydrogen lane, EV just blew by you, and you're talking about 54 stations. We can drive to Vegas, and we can go to a couple of the Tesla ones.
Baker has 88 Tesla chargers plus 12 Electrify America chargers in the same parking lot.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah,
Just in
and
Baker.
it's like this is I struggle with that. There is, I get that this is fascinating, by the way. I'm not trying to totally rip you, but it's fascinating that there are. You claim there's enough demand. A demand is being held back by forces that say, well, you can't have them because there's not enough chargers.
Buy the
there.
egg, not the chicken.
Yeah, that's so weird. That's strange to me, but also it does seem to still indicate that outside of a very small slice of hydrogen enthusiasts or real, these people who really love this versus battery electric, that there's no demand for hydrogen vehicles at scale. Right? Is that a fair assessment, or still poor? There would be more if you had more infrastructure. Is that what's kind of?
It's accurate. It's not necessarily fair, but it's accurate, right?
Okay.
And not fair in the way that you're saying it. It's just fair in how it's kind of broken down. So, let's break that down, right? Americans, for some reason, we want to pick a winner, right? We want to pick, is it going to be VHS or Betamax, right? Is it going to be, black or white or whatever? We
One
just
ring
want
to
to pick
rule them
one
all.
thing,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Rarely is there a conversation where we're like, you can either have wind or you can have solar, but you can't have both, right? It doesn't really make sense. They're complementary technologies. And when it comes to transportation, there are exactly two zero emission technologies out there. There's battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. They're all EVs, right? It's just a question of are you pulling the electricity off the grid, or are you making it in real time on the car, which allows you to refuel it faster? And let's jump into that. So we're in a state with 40 million people, and we have about 40 million cars, roughly. That number's actually come down since then, but since my antiquated numbers here. About half of the people in California live in multifamily housing, right? So right off the bat, you've got about half the population that doesn't have
a home charger,
their own garage, a dedicated parking spot, even a place where they know their car will be every night, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We talk about this very frequently on this podcast.
Okay,
yes.
great. So
well
I'm preaching to the
aware
choir
of the
here a
problem.
little bit, right?
Yes.
So you take Park La Brea, 10,000 people in one housing development, or you take Baldwin Village, the old jungles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 4,000 people. It's tough to get an accurate number on that. Park La Brea is a solid 10,000 people, right?
Right.
Do you think you could put 10,000 chargers up at Park La Brea? Maybe eventually. I don't know if there's even room to park 10,000 cars in Park La Brea, but when you've got dense urban multifamily housing, charging or access to the infrastructure to charge, there are some challenges there. I'm not saying it's either or.
I would say you totally could do level 2. However, the I don't want to say not political will, the will of the landlords to do anything
part of
to
it,
cut
right?
into their profit margin is zero. They're not
part of it, for
landlords
sure.
are not putting in chargers. Yeah.
But let's talk about the consumers now of those vehicles, right? The folks that are making the decisions, probably in Sacramento, have never been to a development like Park La Brea or Baldwin Village or
Yes.
right.
The problem with representative democracy is
so they've probably never been there. They probably don't consider the fact that maybe a lot of people in Baldwin Village are working 2 jobs a day, taking 2 kids to school and back to school, and I know you've got kids. I don't know if you do, but can you take an hour out of your day in between picking up the kids, trying to get to your next job, and sit still at a charging unit for an hour or however long it takes?
Yeah.
Even 30 minutes, right? It's
enough
just,
time. You have 30 minutes to burn.
At face value, that's not we don't. It doesn't seem like that's too much to ask of the population in general, but there are a lot of people that I think that's too much to ask.
Oh,
right?
look, and look, you know this. If you have a kid, I mean, like yesterday was like, you know, we had to go from like the Natural History Museum to basketball practice, and it was like hours of misery involved in that.
Okay.
Right,
So,
but
yeah,
so you're
totally makes sense.
You're laying the foundation between multifamily dwellings, the lack of home charging available, and then people don't have the time to sit around and charge. These are all very common arguments that the ICE, the petrol loving community makes
Sure.
about it. Why battery electrics don't work for me, which would support hydrogen. And hey, you got a thing that you just said can refill in 5 minutes, but then it hasn't been successful.
Right.
The adoption has been there. Right.
Sure.
So keep going. But
Okay.
like why we get the arguments against battery electrics, but again, the price per kilowatt hour is coming down, recharge times are coming down, ranges are going up. I'm not arguing necessarily because I agree they're both electric vehicles, and I love that hydrogen's net product is water and all the great stuff, but it's also, why isn't it here yet? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, right.
So why? And do you think there's a future to hydrogen vehicles?
Okay, so let's just knock these out in order, right? So, and I want to preface this by saying, like, I by no means am I anti-BEV. I honestly applaud the movement. I think it's awesome, right? I'm at heart a car guy. I think relatively speaking to what you guys do, it's lower into the car guy.
We're going to talk about you in a
designation,
second.
but
'cause
yeah,
this
we
is-
can talk about cars. But
Look, I mean, I don't know how this orthodoxy started, but I've noticed it since doing this podcast now for 3 seasons that, like, if you even say you like an electric vehicle, like,
You're not a car guy.
Car guys hate you, and it's like,
It's
oh,
bizarre, right?
All I want in life is a GTR and a GT3. But yeah, it's totally crazy how you can't have both. But please,
so yeah,
continue.
I want to say that by no means am I even suggesting that like we shouldn't have BEVs and we should only have fuel cell electric vehicles. Frankly, I think we need all of the above for Americans, and candidly, beyond the drivetrain or the emissions of the vehicle, until we being the environmental community, the alt fuels community, whatever you want to call it, and until we can give people what they want to drive, the type of car they want to drive, none of them are going to be successful. Mm-hmm. So we're getting there with pickup trucks on the BEV side, and that's a huge step in the right direction, a huge step. And frankly, I really feel like they should have started with pickups and SUVs for hydrogen.
I would say hydrogen towing would have been the smartest thing
That's
you could
the
do.
thing,
It's
man.
like hey man, you have 2 tanks, you can tow 1,000 miles clean. Like, wow, who doesn't want that? And then you get no gears, you get electric towing, which is just awesome. Torque. Yeah.
So we might have missed the mark in just coming out with just passenger vehicles, sedans. But the fundamentals of those cars, you got a 5-minute refueling time for a 400-mile range, and those cars can scale up without really compromising necessarily the range, because the larger the vehicle, you can put some more fuel on board.
Absolutely, yeah.
Look, I saw yesterday a fuel cell Toyota Tacoma. They have the Tundra. They're not for sale, but they've got them. They just haven't started developing them for the consumer market.
That's what I'm saying.
Works.
Is like Tacoma's nice, but like there should be like Ford, GM, and Ram should be doing like heavy duty tow units with 20. You can put 20 kilograms of hydrogen on board and tow for 1,600 miles without refueling.
Well,
clean.
That's where we're going with
And
heavy
more
duty
torque.
trucking.
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And
right.
I do a lot of work around heavy duty trucking.
And we should get to thumb mark that because we should get to.
Okay. Yeah. I think we will. And you look, and a lot of folks in the government are now saying, okay, well, I think hydrogen makes sense for the commercial market for trucking.
Yeah.
I work right now on a lot of port applications, good movement applications. I think it's cool. I actually love that space of the market. If we have time, I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, no, we do have time. Yeah.
But for passenger vehicles, I think if we can just give people this option of being able to drive an electric vehicle that you can refuel in 5 minutes and drive as big as you want, of a vehicle all the way up to an 18-wheeler at this point. Obviously, like, consumers aren't driving 18-wheelers, but the flexibility is there with the technology, the fuel cell technology. I talked about the hydrogen production technology. I wanted to get to the fuel cell technology itself. That's been around and heavily used since the space program in the 50s.
Right.
We've got fuel cells on all our spacecraft. People's lives depend on that technology, and submarines as well. They
Super
use,
mature tech.
electrolyzers,
Super
right?
mature tech,
So
yeah.
there's not really a technological hurdle right now to get through to make that technology work. It's the system. It's the vertical system of hydrogen production, distribution, then stations that has some flaws in it right now.
Is this a U.S. problem with our kind of lagging infrastructure? Like I know, like I talk to BMW often, and they're really pro hydrogen because Germany has this problem where they produce so much green energy they don't know what to do with it, and they're like pissing away 5.2 megawatts a day during the summer. Oh, turn it into green hydrogen. We'll get to the rainbow in a second. And so Germans love infrastructure, and they will build hydrogen stations just like they're building EV chargers. Is this an American problem?
I mean, to build
or
on
do
that,
you know? Or do you know?
Well, I do know there are over 100 hydrogen fueling stations in Germany, right?
Yeah, so
there
54
are
in California.
just over 100 hydrogen cars in Germany, unfortunately, because they don't want to subsidize the cars. They're not putting the huge subsidies on the hood that it takes to get consumers to buy them. So, you can drive a fuel cell vehicle probably, more effectively, more carefree in Germany than you can here, but there are only a few hundred people maybe that are springing, for the cost of one.
I drove the hydrogen X5, and it's great. Like,
Yeah,
wow,
cool
this
car, right?
this is brilliant. I don't know where to get the hydrogen.
How do you feel about those subsidies, though? Like, a big criticism that we get about EVs and like our apparent fervor for them is that, well, nobody actually wants them because it's just the government. The government's mandating them, which is not really accurate. But also, nobody would buy them if it wasn't for the $7,500 tax credit.
We're about to find out.
Yeah, I mean, is that
We're about to find out a lot
are
of
those
things.
fair statements? Should we be more like Germany, where we can lead on the tech, we can build the stuff, but don't let the market decide what they want? Like,
Well, candidly, I'm not a big government guy in terms of saying the government should have their hands in all of this, but I do feel like the role of the government is to really set a goal, set a mark, and then let the market compete to develop the tech or whatever it takes to reach that mark. And to be very specific about that, I think if it's in the context of environmental goals, the government should set a mark and say, hey, we want zero emission vehicles.
Yeah.
Right?
And I need to always, when this comes up, pop in and say, it's not like oil isn't subsidized by the government.
Very strong point,
The
yeah.
first 25% of any energy producer's profits are tax free. It's super subsidized, way more than EVs are.
Absolutely.
Way more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's
And look,
let's always mention that.
fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
that runs deep. Those subsidies run very deep for probably well over 100
We
years.
all should have started oil companies
Yeah, I know. I was
tax
thinking about
free
that.
profit.
Watching Landman.
the
I'm
bank-
like,
after the
maybe,
bank.
Don't watch Landman. Anyways, talk about that later.
Look, and I'm not even. This is weird to say as an enviro. I'm not even like anti-oil at this point because I feel like until we can compete. Like, I can't just blame it on them. We've developed this dependency. We being the people, the government. Like, this runs a lot deeper than one evil company or 10 evil companies that are selling something that's bad for us, right? So I'm not going to demonize those guys. And in fact, some of them really have the capacity and a few of them have the will to be a part of this transition. They see the writing on the wall, maybe 20, 30 years down the road,
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll demonize them always for, doing the studies in the 70s that said, hey,
right.
the stuff that we're burning to make profits is like it's warming the planet. Bury that,
Right.
know.
But are they like, okay, well, let's just close up shop
No,
right now. I get it, right?
Yeah. No, but you're 100% right. Like, our way of life is oil dependent, largely. But then again, also, we had a hurricane wipe out Asheville, North Carolina, and you're from the South and you know how weird that is. And, we just had the most destructive fires in the history of California, coming off the hottest recorded ocean temperatures, coming off, we're 500% below normal rainfall in Southern California, coming off the hottest year in recorded history. Like, government better get involved. Like, what else do they do?
Yeah, that's a great point. So look at the heart of this conversation and where I enter the hydrogen conversation. I'm an enviro, right? Like I'm that's it. It's not because I'm a car guy. It's not because I believe in hydrogen necessarily ahead of any other technology. I'm an enviro, and I think that there are some really cool and elegant solutions where we can kind of have our cake and eat it too. I think we can do this and build super cool cars and trucks or whatever it may be that just, don't cause the worst fires in the, in the history of mankind.
I want to pause here because I was going to ask you this at some point, but you just opened the door with the I'm an enviro statement. where does that come from? Because for those who are listening, and correct me if I'm wrong, Johnny, this gentleman, first of all, he's wearing some kind of like cool, like it looks like East German camouflage shirt, and he's got the black, looks like a thermal, and he's got a cool Rolex on, and he's the clean cut dude. He looks like, you know, in Patriot Games, the Harrison Ford one.
Yeah.
He looks like he's on the bad guys. He's literally.
I'll take that. Those guys were kind of cool.
Yeah,
they were Irish, I believe. I don't.
Yes,
I think they
exactly.
Were, right?
But when they were doing the training stuff.
Yeah, right.
He's the Jewish branch of Sinn Féin.
Yeah, there you
Yes.
go.
Yes.
They weren't just doing the monkey bars and that.
Right. So you are not just you're not the hippy dippy. This is not. We're not Greta Thunberg here. Like, where does this love? Where does the Enviro come from? And then how does it lead you to energy
Your career
independence?
path, yeah.
Now einow.org and is it driveh2.org?
Driveh2.org and EIN is what we
Yes.
go by, but it's
Yes.
energy.
How does it
independence
lead you there? Like, of
All right,
all
let's
places.
get into it.
Origin story.
I'll qualify that with two statements before we go way back to to the early days. So first of all, my wife dresses me, so we've got to give her
Okay,
credit.
great.
I have to
Nice.
get management approval
Shout
before
out
I
to Mrs.
walk out of the
Goldstein.
house. Yeah,
Okay.
so I got to give Erica credit for that. And I'm glad you brought up the term orthodoxy, right? When you were talking
Yeah.
about this, like in car culture when it comes to BEVs, but in the environmental community, there's this like hardcore orthodoxy, man. When we talk about obviously in California, we talk about politics a lot, and I'm not really going to get into that aspect, but we talk about how like the political parties are moving so far, to the extremes, right?
Yeah.
The
Radicalizing, yeah.
environmental movement, and there have always been radical aspects of the environmental movement. I've lived in Colorado when they were burning down,
Hummer dealers.
yeah, crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the environmental community has moved so far; it's become such an orthodox movement that it's almost counterproductive. We can't even get out of our own way because we can't agree on just basic principles of trying to commercialize new technologies. And this is where I feel like I'm kind of putting my own touch on the organization that I run and whatever impact I can have as an enviro, because we've got to be practical about it. And I feel, gosh, man, a little disillusioned with the environmental community in California. I feel like, man, we have put a lot of hurdles up, a lot of obstacles to actually accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish, because the environmental community is saying, hey, in order for us to start, in order for us to just hit, whatever, the starting gun, whatever, on the starting line, it has to be 100%, right? They're certainly saying that in the context of hydrogen. That's been, an age-old issue that we're dealing with in the hydrogen community. And we'll get into the hydrogen colors there if you want to a little later. But they're basically saying, and I say they, we, I don't know, I'm not, but it's like my community, right? They're saying in order for us to accept hydrogen as a transportation fuel, it has to be a 100% renewable from day one. Right. So we just had this whole, issue trying to get tax credits approved, before the administration change. And there's like the, 3 pillars that we can get into and when we go into the colors and stuff. But the environmental community will not accept anything less than 100% renewable, 100% decarbonized or whatever on
Green
hydrogen.
or white or whatever.
Whereas never has one of them said, hey, you can't drive a battery electric vehicle until our grid is 100% renewable, until the grid is 100% wind and solar.
Right.
There's got to be a glide path to commercializing this technology, and there's a double standard in my own community between accepting that for battery electric vehicles and for fuel cell electric vehicles.
Is that just a fight against human nature? And an example, and I've been thinking about this. I've been doing the car thing professionally for 2 decades, right? And I remember when I first got into it, a friend of mine was a top fuel guy, top fuel mechanic, and he took me to a drag race. And it's all top fuel stuff. Everyone there is driving the kind of cars you would expect to see at a drag race. And somebody brought a VW Bug. It was a dragster Bug. And we're standing there, and me and him are talking to another guy, and the guy looks at it, he's like, import. And I'm like, what year were you born? And he was like, 1972 or whatever. And I ran over to the Bug. I'm like, what year is this? He's like, oh, it's a 63. And I'm like, this car's been in America 8 years longer than you, or whatever the math was. Like, and it's like, I see this in the car community where I love lowriders, but like, how can you like lowriders and supercars? Like really be authentic about it? You can't. And like, is it just human nature to like do like it has to be 100%. You can't. All right, we'll burn a little natural gas to make hydrogen. Like, no, you can't do that. Is it like?
It might be the very first step in human nature, but I think, I think a lot of people, maybe a lot of other cultures, might start asking questions before issuing opinions. Like, well, what does it take to go to 100%, or what does that mean, right? I had a economics professor one time tell me, it was just kind of a small comment on his part, but basically the answer to almost every major question, that we're going to talk about in this class is it depends, right? There's never like a yes, no, there's never really a black, white. It depends.
Sure.
And I think, naturally, the older we get, the more we realize that life is lived in this gray area, and that it's, we might want to say, okay, well, VHS was better than Betamax technology. Well, you live a little bit, you realize, well, maybe Betamax actually was more efficient, and there were some weird reasons.
Right. It was cheaper for porn producers
Yeah,
to put
there
it on
you go,
VHS,
right.
and that's who was renting the most videotapes. Yeah.
Right. So, it might be a little human nature in there, but, we can get into that. I do want to answer your question. I don't know how far back you want me to go. I always think of the line in The Jerk when he says, I was born a poor black child in rural Mississippi. I don't know if you guys, I'm dating myself. With this,
Well, you were born a Jewish child in Alabama, right?
I was.
That's similar.
Born and raised in Florence, Alabama. There certainly weren't a lot of Goldsteins there. A lot of people haven't heard of Florence, but we have sister city, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, which a lot of people have heard of because of the music industry.
Yes, Leonard Skinner. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really cool little nook in this country. And my family's not from there. My mom's from the Bronx. They did the Jewish Trail of Tears to Miami in the 50s. Cool stories there. And my dad grew up in Virginia and essentially, was playing college football at the University of Virginia and failed out. And when he was in school, his parents had randomly moved to Alabama, and he didn't have anywhere to go, so he had to go to Alabama and stay with his parents until he could get back into school. And my mom and dad met in 1963 at the University of Alabama, the fall after Kennedy had to call in the National Guard to integrate the school.
Right.
No idea what they were thinking. I
Sure.
like to think they wanted to be part of the solution, down there and part of it, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's just dumb luck. They ended up in Alabama, and here I am, right? So. They made an agreement they'd go wherever, one of them got a first job. My mom was a professor at a University of North Alabama. So they moved there, and I was born and raised in Florence, Alabama. But I bring up this university aspect because the fact that it's a university town, even though it's a small rural community, there's a lot of cultural stimulation there, and with the music industry as well, there's a lot of cultural stimulation there. And so it's an interesting little nook. I never really felt comfortable or at home there, and I got out when I could. But I've got a lot of respect for the communities where my parents still live.
And Alabama's beautiful.
Oh yeah, it's amazing, right? So I grew up. Doing a lot of Boy Scout stuff, a lot of, I grew up, the house I lived in until we were 15, we were out in the woods, man. I was every day after school, get out of the house until it's dark, go run around in the woods, and just like grew up doing outdoor stuff, my whole life, and just had like a really strong pull in that direction. And, frankly, where the car culture aspect of this comes in, I'm a truck guy. I've always been a truck guy. My first car was a hand-me-down, like third generation Honda Prelude. That wasn't like, I didn't identify with the car, but it was.
I'm trying to. Third gen would be like 90.
No, I was the third person in my family to own that car, right?
What year Prelude?
Yeah, I was trying to think about
pop-up headlights.
I believe so. I think it was in 1988.
Yes.
Oh, 88. That's I think second gen. I think.
Yeah. So in terms of the Prelude, so there was one before that. So
the
my
original
sister
Prelude,
had that original
80,
Prelude.
My friend had an 82 Prelude. What a car.
I got this this Prelude that had belonged to 2 or 3 other people in my family. And when I finally turned 16, my dad was like, "Look, if you're gonna have a car, you got to do something. You can't just like lay around the house in the summers or whatever." Obviously, I had to go to school. But he's like, you got to go to work. I don't care what you do. You got to go to work. And so. And he made a deal with me. He said, "Look, whatever money you earn from work," he's like, "you're gonna put it away, and I'll pay for your beer money or McDonald's money or whatever it is. And but let's do this together." And he's like, "What kind of stuff do you want to do?" And so ultimately, I ended up building like a lawn care and landscaping business and buying was my first vehicle was a Nissan hardbody pickup truck.
Nice.
You got this this Jewish kid in Florence, Alabama, driving a Nissan hardbody pickup with the roll bar and the lights and all that shit, yeah, I loved that truck actually. And I ran this like lawn care. We were cutting lawns after school and in the summer and drinking beer. And yeah, it was great. It was great. But, I really identified as a truck guy. At the same time, I mentioned my family was all down in Miami, so I would go down to Miami and I'd see like real cars, like exotics.
Great, great car scene.
Oh my God, it was
better
great
than
car
ever
city.
currently, but yeah.
Yeah, and there was this one dealership there, man. It was something imports.
Prestige
Imports. I
Yes.
knew you would know this, right?
I've been many times.
So
in fact, if you go there, there's like YouTube videos of me on loop.
That's cool.
It's pretty wild, yeah.
So I remember, my grandfather would take me there and we'd walk around. I'd just look at these cars. I'm like, holy shit, these cars are really cool. I remember seeing the Lambo LM002 there, and I'm like, this is where
That's what it's all
exotic
about.
cars meet trucks, and I
That's
just
what it's all about.
But like, those cars never really, like, I appreciate them as an art form, but they never really spoke to me as like, what I'm comfortable driving. In car culture where I grew up, I just didn't identify with it. We could go into that time period of car culture and car stereos and all this, leading up to the SEMA age and stuff like that. But I was just always more comfortable in trucks. I wanted to be able to, camp in my car, sleep in my car, whatever it may be. And this, kind of tying these two things together when I said earlier that I think if zero emission vehicles are going to be successful, we've got to give people what they want to drive. And ultimately, a lot of the country wants to drive trucks, man.
Let me fast
So
forward.
you're an Eagle Scout who you like being outdoors. You in your bio you're an Eagle Scout.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that leads to the environmental.
It does. It's where it all got started, right?
Okay.
So the transition from Alabama is kind of a cool story. So small town, we didn't necessarily have all the testing that you need to go to college. We had ACT tests, but if you needed to take the SAT, you had to go to a different city to do this. And
that's wild. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, crazy. I had to go to
considering where
different
we
city.
grew up in, like I think they developed the SAT in the Conejo Valley.
Probably right. That's why they were asking about surfing. I was like, what the fuck is no. So I was a truck guy, and for fun, and I know this. It's kind of weird for like a Jewish guy living in LA to talk about growing up. Like on Friday nights, going out into cotton fields, we would drive 4x4 into these cotton fields, and two people do a pickup truck, and one would buy a case of beer, and one would buy a bottle of whiskey.
Let me pause you here. I grew up basically in L.A., and that's what we would do.
Oh,
it wasn't a cotton
great.
field, but we'd go out to like Camarillo or into the avocado groves and do the same thing.
Yeah, right. Kids are kids wherever you go.
Very common
right?
to drink on farms. Yes.
So we would do that, and then we'd go what we called mud riding, right? Mud riding, mud romping,
mud
stuff like
womping.
that.
Yeah.
So I did this the night before I was supposed to take the SAT. Got stuck in the mud, couldn't get the truck out, ended up having to walk home. I don't even know if my parents know this story, so they're going to love this one. Ended up having to walk home like several miles, caked in mud. And, got home at 3 o'clock in the morning. I had to get up and drive to this other city and take the SAT the next day. And I had like kind of in my mind, like a predefined path now to education and career path and stuff like that. I was going to go to a school in the South or the East Coast. I had an opportunity to play soccer at Vanderbilt or Tulane. And I thought, Virginia was my first choice because I had family members there. I was a soccer guy. I really, really wanted to play soccer. And I'm at this school the next day that wasn't my school. And we had like a few minute break in the SAT. And I'm walking around, and their guidance counselor office had this picture of the University of Colorado poster. University of Colorado. Literally, kids now have no idea what I'm talking about. You could tear the little piece of paper off. You write your name down, you mail it in, and they like mail you an application and a brochure about the university. And I saw that, and it was like this angelic music, like, holy shit, you can go to college at the base of a mountain where like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Like, why would I move to Nashville or New Orleans
Boulder
or whatever?
is stunning, yeah.
So I ripped it off, mailed it in, got into the school, didn't get into my number one school. I told my parents, I'm like, hey, I'm going to University of Colorado. And they're like, you have never set foot in the state of Colorado. What the hell are you talking about? I'm like, look at the picture, right? That's all you need to do.
All right, yeah.
So I ended up in Colorado and transitioned from soccer into snowboarding and was just out in the mountains, every chance, like way more than I was in school. That's a whole other story. But, I was driving.
Yeah.
At the time, I transitioned to a Pathfinder, which was always like my absolute dream car. And I was driving this Pathfinder back and forth to the mountains. Like before class, I'd show up in class with my snowboarding bibs and boots on, dripping wet, borrow a piece of paper from the person on my right and a pencil from the person on my left. But that Pathfinder was my like gateway into the mountains. And so I'm thinking, well.
So you like the environment, is what?
Yeah, I was an outdoorsy guy, and but
Yeah.
it was reliant on trucks and 4x4s to be able to do it, and so the environmental movement was kind of starting to trickle into people our age. Then by that point it was the 90s, and we're starting to realize the harm that we're doing. And I kind of had this passion for cars that I ended up developing a little bit after that, once I moved out here, and ultimately found my first job kind of by dumb luck in this space where I could combine the two. I could be like in the automotive industry, but doing some zero emission alt fuels work is what we used to call it back then.
And that was with?
That was with an early startup company. Funny enough, that was formed essentially to develop hydrogen stations in response to Schwarzenegger's California Hydrogen Highway. So, fast forward in a little bit, I ended up moving to California to go to grad school. I got a scholarship to move out here. I thought, well, man, LA is a hellhole. I'm going to go out there for 1 year. The day I'm done with this school, I'm out of here. And ended up falling in love with it. And
it happens.
doing some car stuff. I got a buddy who's really into cars and took me on a gumball rally in Europe, and I ended up doing a bull run, and I just really kind of getting this exposure to cars, and that the whole like SEMA world was really ramping up then. There was a lot of excitement in LA around. It's obviously automotive culture here, but it was really popping then. There were a lot of marketing dollars coming into big car parties and stuff like that in LA, and it was just a lot of fun. So I had, through my mentor in grad school, her husband was a serial entrepreneur and decided to start a company essentially building hydrogen stations to try to take advantage of the subsidies coming out of Sacramento. And so when I got out of grad school, ended up linking up with this guy and becoming the first employee of this company. There was a little stop there. I was actually CFO of a motorcycle manufacturing company.
Funny.
Kind of brought in there to try to help save the company that wasn't really doing that well financially, and kind of got my exposure to vehicle manufacturing, and just was part of the automotive industry in that capacity. But got this opportunity to come into what was really kind of an environmental job in the automotive space, and I loved it. Had this passion for it from day one.
So we're running up against the time barrier.
Okay,
right now.
all right.
But I think the last question I want to ask is, we saw it. Everyone missed it, but we saw it January 1st in Norway. Passed, no more internal combustion vehicles can be sold to consumers in Norway. California is on target for 2035. Does the hydrogen passenger vehicle hold on until then? Because I imagine once you can't buy an internal combustion vehicle, if that law holds up, that would be the real, cracking point of the chicken and egg problem. Is like, well,
To rephrase it, are hydrogen cars inevitable?
Man,
put on your futurist.
yeah.
goggles.
Now I've been in this space for 20 years, and up until 6 months ago, I would say absolutely yes. And honestly, the light duty aspect of hydrogen and fuel cells right now is getting chest compressions, man. It's pretty bad, and it's really just all about having reliable places to fuel. It's not about the cars at all, and it's really sad to see. I feel like a few people in Sacramento have really screwed it up for everybody. I think there are some other factors that are going to play into that. So we are seeing a lot of funding going into heavy duty trucking. A lot into port applications, a lot into heavy industrial decarbonization, where you're using renewable hydrogen at oil refineries instead of fossil hydrogen, and then in energy storage, which is what you were mentioning. I forgot what country you were mentioning.
Germany.
In Germany. But we're curtailing massive amounts of electricity in California, wasting it or paying other people to take it. And we can be storing that in the form of hydrogen and then using that for industrial decarbonization and transportation. So, bringing that back to, are these cars inevitable? Right now, right now we may just benefit from the growth of the heavy duty trucking space, and from the maybe economies of scale for the fuel coming down when you're using so much fuel for trucking. If we have time to talk about port applications, I think that'll be a really cool area that's developing now. But I think now, if the light duty fuel cell electric vehicle movement survives, it will be largely because we're getting a little help elsewhere in the market.
One last question. So if people want to know more, right, we listed the website. It's EI Now, energyindependencenow.org, driveh2.org. Who pays the bills? Where do
Well-
you guys get? Is this? Do you guys write grants? Are you getting funding? Is it government funding? Are you part of big hydrogen?
All of the above. And honestly, that the answer to that question changes every year.
Oh, what a nightmare.
It is tough. It's tough as hell to keep any kind of nonprofit afloat, and we've got to kind of change and pivot with the industry and kind of even the political winds that are inevitably changing right now. So, look, when light duty was stronger, there's more funding around light duty automotive marketing budgets than there ever will be for some commercial trucking company or marketing budget, or the marketing budget for a shipping terminal or something like that.
Sure.
So we were able to kind of tap into that and develop some education outreach campaigns, teaching people about fuel cell electric vehicles, light duty, and that was really kind of our bread and butter for let's say the last 5 years or so. And then we tap into government grants and foundation funding. We were part of the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation for a little while when my mentor, now partner in this area, was CEO of that organization. So we were able to really kind of tap into the philanthropy world a little more then, and then that kind of moved away. So
It's probably because you guys are now over 20.
25 is a joke.
Zing
Yeah,
is
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
but okay.
Oh,
let's-
man.
I love it. So honestly,
I was literally about to say, then you turn 25, but I was like, maybe I shouldn't go there. But since you went there, absolutely. Yeah.
So I've got to say, the Biden administration put a lot of money into hydrogen, and that's supposed to trickle down to California. And who knows if it really will or not. Right. That may be a potential source of funding that keeps us afloat next year, but I
We
doubt
had a
it.
guy on, and I'm blanking on his name, and it was the hydrogen boat guy.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
so blanking.
From Zero
Emissions Industries. And after we turned the mics off, he said, actually, the Trump administration might be great for hydrogen because what you were kind of talking about, like, we won't care what makes the hydrogen. Burn all the oil you want to make hydrogen. They won't care. There'll be no environmental play at all. But hydrogen is really good for lots of applications. So we'll get this massive hydrogen infrastructure. And then if another administration comes in that then cares about the environment, the infrastructure's there, then you just turn the hydrogen from black to blue or green,
Switch
white,
it, yeah.
and then
Switch from dirty to clean. Yeah.
Yeah, look at
does that make any Joe Pratt? Thank you.
Yeah,
producer
sure,
Sean.
sure, yeah.
Yeah. Does that make any sense?
It does, and to be blunt about it, the hydrogen community did fine in Trump 1 administration. We
Yeah.
did fine in the Bush administration. They brought out a lot of incentives. We took a big hit. We took a big hit in the Obama administration at first because Secretary Chu, the Secretary of the Department of Energy, came out and was just like, I'm not going to support hydrogen. They cut funding. So, I'd say the political winds haven't been as brutal for the hydrogen movement as you would expect it to be for any other environmental endeavor.
Well,
But-
I mean, again, if you're burning natural gas, that's the petroleum industry, essentially. That, like, yeah, let's make hydrogen, burn gas.
Yeah, I mean, look at that too, because like the petroleum industry obviously has a lot of clout. If we are moving into a zero emission future, whether they like it or not, they probably have a better leg up on entering the hydrogen market than they do on the battery market. They're already producing
right.
hydrogen. They're using hydrogen. They know how to move hydrogen. They're not in the battery business. So, those guys they have a pretty loud voice in DC. And like I said, I mean, we did fine in the first Trump administration. I think Musk is the wild card right now. He's openly come out against hydrogen. Some of it's just bullshit. Some of it's just anti-competitive stuff.
Yeah,
right?
no, remember he was the guy who said, Rivian will be bankrupt tomorrow.
Yeah,
and
right.
like, okay, yeah.
Look, if hydrogen is going to take a much bigger role in trucking, that's a threat to the future of the heavy duty side of Tesla, and he's as unpredictable as anyone else.
But at least he's got an office in the White House now.
Yeah, there you go. Right, so it'll be a lot faster.
On that
death
note,
than,
though, we do have to wrap this up.
Okay,
but
fair enough.
Absolute pleasure. I think next time we come back, we'll do the rainbow. Next time we'll do port stuff.
Okay.
Because it'd be interesting to see in a couple of years where hydrogen's at.
Yeah, look, the rainbow's an important part of it. It really is. And so, I've been talking about this for 20 years.
With other
so
hydrogen people. But
we could save that for part 2. But I appreciate you guys having me on.
Oh, it was awesome. Brian, thank you so
All right,
much.
great. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.